love these movies. These are probably some of my favorite kids' movies, Inside Out 2, because they accurately and whimsically, right, describe some of the real processes that are happening in our brains related to remembering. And so yesterday, I felt like Mandy and I had the opportunity to create some really fun memories together because we got to do something we haven't gotten to do in a long time, and that's just like spend the day together, just me and her. We ate lunch, we ran some errands, we were very productive, that's if being productive is a love language, that's her. But as we were creating these memories together, full transparency, we were at this particular store, and I realized that I was getting anxious about something that she was doing, okay? And she doesn't know this, and so she's hearing this for the first time. She's really wondering what in the world's going on here. This is not an intervention, by the way. This is like me, a confession, this transparency. Have you ever had someone run up on the back of your foot with a shopping cart? Yeah, oh yeah, and you remember it, right? It's kind of, I'm pretty sure that all of my children have done that to me. And at that moment, I feel like turning into Bruce Lee, and you hear the scream from aisles away in the store, right? Because there's something about that little bar hitting your Achilles tendon. And you're like, I'm never going to walk again, right? So now she has never done this, right? She has never done this. Others in my family have done it multiple times, of course on accident. But you just never forget it, right? You never forget it. And so yesterday, she's behind me, and I hear the shopping cart wheels like, kind of creaking and approaching, and I'm like this. I'm like, kind of like dancing through the aisles, and I'm sure she's wondering, what is wrong with him? I married him. I'm stuck with him. But it was that fear emotion on the inside warning me, you don't want to go back there, right? Like you don't want that feeling again, so do whatever it takes to avoid it, right? And so you think, why is that? Why do and I don't have PTSD from that, but at the same time, it is a negative memory. And so why is it that negative memories trigger, but positive memories are rarer to trigger? Like they don't trigger as often as negative memories do. Why do certain sounds and places or things like that bring up those negative memories? And it's because we are hardwired for survival by God. God's designed you that way. You are hardwired for survival. When negative things happen, stress hormones flood your brain, causing those memories to be more deeply embedded into your memory bank. And so those memories end up getting played on repeat so that you guard yourself against it and saying, never again will I have a shopping cart run up on my heel, right? Never again will that happen to me. Now, positive memories, from a neurological standpoint, do not trigger the same intense chemical response as negative memories. So they fade quicker than the negative memories do. You don't just passively have positive thoughts. You have to actively reinforce positive memories. And it goes back to this saying that we have said over and over and over again, that which we don't intentionally remember, we unintentionally forget. That which we don't intentionally remember, we unintentionally forget. Last week in the book of Joshua, we ended by saying that you can be active or you can be passive. If you actively engage in worshiping the Lord, you're becoming something that honors the Lord and makes the world around you better. But if you are passive spiritually, then you will worship other things, you will struggle with fear, and you will become somebody that cultivates bad habits relationally with those around you, possibly even becoming someone that victimizes or even objectifies other people. And so what we're going to see this week as we get into the book of Judges, and that's where you can turn, is Judges chapter 1, what you're going to see this week is this convergence of passivity and forgetfulness coming into one horrific storyline. And so as you turn there, let me just remind you of the story thus far. The 4-chapter plot line of the Bible is creation, fall, redemption, restoration. We've mentioned that already. But in creation, we know that God created perfectly, that man perfectly corrupted God's creation with his choice to sin. All of the goodness of God's creation, our relationship with him, our relationship to each other, and even our relationship to creation has been stained by sin. That's why shopping carts can do you harm, right? But God faithfully established his rescue plan. with this promise to Abraham's family, just like we commented down here. God's going to restore the blessing. God's going to bring a redeemer. And that trademark faithfulness from God has been the theme of the story thus far. God is the ultimate promise keeper. He kept his promise as he delivered the people from famine to Egypt through Joseph. He kept his promise as he delivered the people from Egyptian slavery through Moses. He extended his promises as he gave his life-shaping law to Israel. He was faithful through their complaining in the wilderness. He was faithful to give them victory over the nations of Canaan as they trusted in him. And he was faithful to raise up leaders like Moses and Joshua. But the problem with all human leaders is that they all die. And that's where we begin in the book of Judges. Chapter 1, verse 1. After the death of Joshua. Now remember how he challenged them in Joshua chapter 24, verses 14 and 15. He says, "Now fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, then choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." The people heard that, and they responded obediently to that challenge for a while. The book of Judges breaks down into three main sections here. And the first section is chapters 1 and 2. They're basically a recap of what happened in the book of Joshua. The tribes are in their territories. Remember, the land is divided up, and God's called the tribes to inhabit certain areas of the land. And so God's called them to those areas, and they're there. But the Canaanites, that is all the tribes that were in the land of Canaan, they're still in the land, proving that Joshua had not destroyed everyone from all the tribes they conquered. And remember, God told the Israelites to drive them out because of their moral corruption and the practice of child sacrifice, because God knew that would rub off on Israel. And God had called Israel to be holy. And so chapter 2 introduces the rest of the book. It summarizes what you're going to see. This part of Israel's history is just going to be one repeated cycle throughout the book of Judges, over and over and over and over. The first phase of the cycle is sin. Israel turns from God and falls into idolatry. The second phase is servitude. As a consequence of their disobedience, God allowed foreign nations to oppress them. The third phase is suffering. Israel cries out to God. God allows them to suffer at the hands of a surrounding nation. The fourth phase is surrender. Israel cries out to God in repentance. The fifth phase, salvation. God raises up a judge to deliver them, because he hears their cry, much like he heard their cry when he raised up Moses. And these judges don't think they're judges like a probate judge or a family court judge or a wellness court judge or a traffic court judge or a night court judge. Right? Remember that show? That's not the kind of judge that we're dealing with here in the book of Judges. These are more like regional, political, military leaders. Right? And so as God would raise them up, those judges would bring deliverance or salvation. And then there would be peace or silence. Israel would experience that peace, and that peace would lull them to sleep, and they would return to idolatry, which caused the entire cycle to start back over again. So Judges 1 and 2 introduce us to what the book's going to look like. Then you have the next three sections, right? In Judges was the next section, Judges 3 through 16, and this breaks down into a few different sections. The first section is about these three judges, that they're kind of this epic adventure story. Now, if you want more detailed accounts of these stories, they're really fun, right? And I say fun, right, in a biblical sense. We actually did a full series on the book of Judges where we did in-depth looks at these judges all the way back, I want to say it was like my first year here. But it's on the app, and you can actually go, Othniel, Ehud, all those guys, Deborah and Barak, so we got to include the lady in there as well. So all of these folks were used to deliver Israel, and some of these judges were used in incredible ways. And so you can go look at those on the app if you want to. But the first three judges are this epic adventure. But from there, it's just this downward spiral. And early on, you see the judge's strength comes from the Spirit of God. And you need to know that God's Spirit coming upon them is not an endorsement of their lifestyle or their choices, but simply His Spirit comes to accomplish the purposes that God has to deliver the people. The Holy Spirit is not in operation like He is in the church, right? He comes and indwells all of us as believers, and He never leaves us or forsakes us. But if you try to place that on the Old Testament, and specifically the book of Judges, you see the Spirit coming and going and coming and going, and you're like, well, is that the way it is for my life? And it's not. And so you have these stories beginning in chapter 6 about this one named Gideon. He begins as a coward, but he eventually trusts God. He defeats the Midianites with 300 men, but he has a nasty temper and he murders some of his fellow Israelites for not helping him. And he ends his life by creating an idol of gold which the people start to worship. And then in the stories of the first three judges, when the judge died, the people were swayed by the influence of the surrounding nation. But starting with Gideon, the idolatrous influence arises from within, because at the end of Gideon's life, he basically he tries to set up his sons to reign as kings, and he ends up setting up this idolatry that distracts Israel. So starting with Gideon, the idolatrous influence arises from within Israel rather than coming from outside of Israel. Then in chapters 10 through 12, they're about a tough guy from the mountains named Jephthah. Old Jeff, he's an effective leader, and he experiences victory over the Ammonites, but Jephthah only knows enough about the God of Israel to be dangerous. He doesn't actually know Him personally. He doesn't know the law of God. It's just lip service to him that, I'm going to be a judge. And so Jephthah, the story is awful. He's so unfamiliar with the God of Israel that he seeks to worship the God of Israel as the Canaanites would seek to worship the God of Canaan. And so he wins a victory. He goes to his house and he says, I'm gonna, in honor of the victory, I'm going to sacrifice the first thing that walks out the door to God. And he probably thought it was going to be, like an animal or something like that, but instead it's his daughter. And so Jephthah doesn't know that God would not want him to fulfill a vow by taking the life of his daughter. And so this is a microcosm of the state of Israel. Israel no longer knows the character of their own God. Like I said, it's just this downward spiral. And the ultimate display of Israel not knowing the character of their own God is chapters 13 through 16 in the story of Samson. Once again, if you're just raised on the VeggieTales version of these stories, like you just got a harsh reality when you actually read them, right? First of all, you go read the story and go listen to my message on Samson all those years ago. Samson doesn't get his strength from his hair. The text never says that. You're like, what? It doesn't, right? Once again, it's from the Spirit of the Lord. His life kind of begins in a promising way, but as he grows, he has no regard for God. And he is promiscuous, he is violent, he's arrogant, he experiences victories over the Philistines, but at the expense of his integrity. And at the end of his life, when he has been utterly defeated, he finally, for the first time that we get awareness of, he calls out to God. And his strength returns, right? Not because his hair had grown back out, but because the Lord was going to use him. And then finally in chapters 17 through 21, things hit rock bottom for Israel, and they are completely corrupt. And the text dissolves into godless, X-rated practices, and Israel experiences their first ever civil war. And so you think, well, why did this happen? Sorry, some of my slides get out of order. Why did this happen? Well, don't ever forget the capacity of human forgetfulness. Don't ever forget the capacity of human forgetfulness. Some will answer that the source of Israel's unfaithfulness was the influence of the surrounding nation, and that's not necessarily a bad read on it. Joshua knew that would be a possibility, but the real reason is found in Joshua chapter 2, verse 10. So I know you've tracked with me along the rest of the story, but go all the way back to Joshua chapter 2, verse 10. And this is back in the book prior. Joshua chapter 2, verse 10 says, "There arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel." Now that doesn't make sense. Wasn't Israel commanded in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 5 through 9, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might? And these words that I command to you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and you shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. And you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. And you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. I mean, we went through Exodus, we went through Leviticus, we went through Deuteronomy. The presence of God, the law of God, the perspective of God was meant to consume their life. And so how is it possible that an entire generation arose that did not know the works of God? It's because the older generation didn't live it out before them and tell them about it. They didn't follow God's design. You see, parents may think that the most corrupting influences on our kids' lives come from the outside world, and that may very well be the case in some instances, but the reality is that kids are corrupted far worse by a lack of spiritual direction within the home, and a discipleship in the wrong direction within the home, and an intentional focus on things other than the work of the Lord inside the home than on anything that influences them from outside the home. And there's statistical data. There have been studies on American Christianity and teenagers. There's a book called Soul Searching, The Surprising Life of American Teenagers, by a guy named Christian Smith, and he's a sociologist, and he basically documents, and he's done multiple follow-up studies. Nobody, even with the advent of the internet, even with the advent of social media, even with the advent of smartphones, no one has more sway and more influence on a child's life than their parent. And so as parents, we need to heed that warning of Gideon. Don't become so comfortable in your victories. Don't become so comfortable in your wealth. Don't become so comfortable in your past that you take your eyes off the giver of the gifts and become a worshiper and a worship leader for some other false god. The book of Judges reminds us that people who give themselves over to sin as parents and as grandparents, they make victims out of the people around them. Gideon's kids, Jephthah's daughter, Samson's parents. And at the very end of the book of Judges, there's human trafficking and women are treated like property. And Israel has effectively become indistinguishable from the nations around them. You say, well, Ryan, how can we battle the tendency of human beings to forget? How can we battle the tendency of human beings to forget? And so we've already talked about the power of memory, right? We've already identified that there's something going on in the way that God has hardwired us to where we are, we're already prone, I think, as a product of the fallen world, we're already prone to play the negatives on repeat. I mean, how many of you have had a great week and really everything's gone the way it needs to, nothing bad's happened, you got no major phone calls or crises, but one bad thing happens and it changes your entire mood, and all of a sudden you're stuck in that bad mood cycle because of that one thing. And you immediately forget, you immediately are not living in light of all the good, right? But it's that one bad thing you can't get off your mind. Why is that, right? It's because you were created to be a worshiper. And yet in this fallen world, the human heart is an idol-making factory, and so you'll make idols out of anything but God. You'll worship anything but God. I'll worship anything but God. And so even though it doesn't seem like that's what's happening, that cycle of negativity in your mind, you're leading your own little worship service in there. And that's why it's so hard to uproot those things. And so I want to give you just a few practical ways. And I think one of them is going to seem from left field, but I'll explain the reason why. And the rest of them I think will make sense, okay? So let's start with the one from left field. I'll give you time to chew on it for a second, okay? Jesus led the way for us to understand the reality of what we call the treasure principle. Randy Alcorn was the one who coined the phrase, the treasure principle, but essentially it says that your heart follows your money. And there was Jesus put such a strong emphasis on this idea of you can't serve God and money, because he knew that no matter what age mankind was in, that this would be a primary struggle for people who are wired for survival, who are wired for comfort, and who now in our day and age have the most opportunities for comfort than we've ever had before in the history of mankind. And so this war, this worship war that's happening inside of us is got to be the first order of business if we're talking about finding peace, if we're talking about finding biblical discipleship, if we're talking about not forgetting God, if we're talking about actively remembering God, then God would say, when you prioritize and you settle who the Lord is in your bank account and in your checkbook or on your Venmo app, I don't know what the younger terminology. I don't know. Y'all still don't use checkbooks. So your debit card, right, or your Cash App, or whatever it is, right, that you're using, right. When you are actively taking captive that area and saying Jesus is Lord of this area, something happens there, okay, that sets the tone for everything else. And this is where we get into one of those, that's just pastor talk, right? Preacher's supposed to say this because, the church, when we obviously have like a tithes and offerings, and we have a budget and all this kind of stuff, and so pastors are supposed to say this. And so here's what I would say is, if this is something that is not a discipline in your life, that Jesus is Lord of your finances, and you're not active in the spiritual discipline, the consistent spiritual discipline of giving to the ministry of the local church, then you're being passive and you're letting other things rule that part of your life. So all we're doing is we're applying the treasure principle, or we're applying this principle of worship to your finances. You say, well, Ryan, I don't believe you. You don't have to. But here's what I would tell you. How fleeting is your peace? And how deep is your walk with the Lord? And how settled are you and secure in that walk with the Lord are you? I would persuade you that that your finances, this is not health and wealth prosperity gospel, but that your finances and the degree of your submission to the Lord in those finances to follow His way of tithing and of giving generously, of both of those, that your finances and the fervency of your surrender and your worship to the Lord are in a positive relationship with one another, meaning that they go up and down together. Because Jesus Himself said, you will find your security in one or the other. Well, how do you know if you're finding security in God and not money? Well, is Jesus Lord of your finances? If Jesus is Lord of your finances, then you give to the ministry of the local church. You say, well, I give. I mean, you asked us to give to Tucker last year. You asked us to give to Addison this year. We give to special offerings and every now and then. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about offerings. I'm not talking about just random, I'm going to pull the cash out of my pocket and drop it in the plate. I'm talking about consistent, disciplined, God, that's yours. Active, it's yours. This is my declaration of worship. It's yours. Now, we do that with our time. We do that with our abilities, our talents. Why is it that it's such a battle to do it with our treasure? It sounds like Jesus knew what he's talking about, right? And you say, well, you didn't ask this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. So you say, well, Ryan, how do you do it? So you may be surprised to hear that this was a struggle for Mandy and I for a long time. Y'all, we've been a single income family for 25 years now. And so if you're a double income family, I'm almost, probably 99% sure that you're making more than we ever have before. And it was always did we do it? Did we not do it? Did we do it? Did we not do it? And over the last 5 years of our life here, it's been settled. And it was settled actively, but in a way that for us, now some of y'all may disagree with this, but for us, because we were so forgetful about it, once again, what we don't intentionally remember, we unintentionally forget, that using the app to just set it up to where it's recurring and it takes it out before we ever even, because it's like we don't carry a checkbook, we don't really carry cash, and so we just set this up to go. And that way there's a certainty, right? Now that I come back and I talk to you, there's a certainty that this part of our life, that's his. That's his. It's just settled. And so the treasure principle. As that part of your life gets settled, the activity of worshipful, generous giving works in you, transforms you, and it causes you to care about what you're investing in. And so that's the one that I think maybe doesn't get related a lot, but here's the other ways, right? Here's the other ways that if you want to cultivate this, I want to be actively remembering the things of God in my life and bringing them to my attention and creating habits to where that's what I'm thinking about. That's what I'm disciplining myself to think about. Then do this, church. Write it down. If that's having a physical notebook that's just dedicated to that, and at the end of each day, you come and you write down 3 things you're thankful for that day, try doing that for a month. Your entire perspective will be shifted. If you struggle with negativity, start here. Start here. And then use that as a jumping off point to prayer. So don't just write it down saying thank you. We're not thanking the universe here, right? We're thanking someone, and that someone is Jesus. And so turn that into prayer. Okay, then savor it. Savor it. Well, how do you savor it? Well, obviously, we've got these wonderful cameras in our pockets, right? And so don't be afraid to be that person that takes pictures in special moments or videos in the special moments. All the grandparents in here are like, well, yeah, right? And so kids, hear me. As a dad of 7 kids, hear me. When your parents pull the camera out to take pictures of you, if you hide your face, you're not helping them savor the moment. If you do the whole, or you do, whatever, right? I'm not calling anybody out in my family, I'm just saying, okay? I've seen it. So savor it. And then, once you take the picture, put the phone away and be in the moment. That's the other way you savor it. So it's a both and, right? Work on both. Share it. On Friday, I was with a professor, and this professor was recounting this season of his life where he saw God move in some amazing ways. And after he finished sharing with us, one of the other people in the class, they looked at him and they said, man, the entire time you were talking about that, you had a smile on your face. Now, this is like 35 or 40 years ago. And he said, it's because I remember it just like it was yesterday, right? So the more you share it, with others, share about what God's done, then the more you will bring it to mind and remember. And then lastly, serve. That one may seem like it doesn't make sense. But if you serve others, if you intentionally use your strength to enrich the lives of others and point them to Jesus, or just show kindness to them, maybe when they're in a season of needing that kindness, when you do that, you deepen your own capacity to remember and to have these positive thoughts and feelings and glean meaning from daily life and your own sense of joy and fulfillment. That which you don't intentionally remember, you will unintentionally forget. And so, church, we live in a day where we're talking about a lot of mental health. It's just all over the place. We live in a day where people get into really, really dark places. And there's not just one hard and fast, answer to that. But I would tell you, you begin here, then you're cultivating and working with the way that God hardwired you in order to live a joyful and a hopeful life. Not in negativity, not in the kind of anxiousness and worry. Once again, that's a worship issue. And so I would encourage you today, settle this. Take these down, and this week, get it settled. Set up, if you have to, set up that recurring giving in the app. Settle it once and for all. Take these down. Start doing that thing where at the end of each day, 3 things I'm thankful for. And I'm going to use those as a way in my day, thanking God for the day He gave me. It'll change everything. It'll change everything. All of these things reflect a Father who knows us and who loves us and is one who, why would we ever want to forget Him? If we're prone to forget, think about who we're forgetting. I'm in that season of life where, and this is going to really date me here, but those of you of a certain generation in this room, you remember the song "Cats in the Cradle"? Yeah. Okay, young people, y'all just heard that response, right? The song "Cats in the Cradle" is about a dad who didn't have time for his kids, and then when he gets older, now his kids don't have time for him, right? And so it's like that song just like rips your heart out when you hear it. And the kind of the moral of the song is, hey, if you're in that season, hey, start now. Start now. Don't wait. And so that would be my same, start now. Don't wait. Hey, you could take the invitation and set up the recurring thing on your phone. You can, if you're struggling with a particular area of your life and you need prayer, you need to open up to somebody about it. This invitation is a time to do that. But start now. Don't put it off. Don't wait. Because guess what happens? The longer you distance yourself from that moment of decision, the more likely you are to forget. And that which we don't intentionally remember, we will unintentionally forget. And the last person that we want to forget is our Father, who's calling for us to come to Him. Let's pray.